So, kind of our key elements of social ecology are essentially what we've talked about through this whole thing, that we want to look at the past in order to understand where we came from, how capitalism originally arose. We want to understand what capitalism is. We want to understand how past movements reacted to capitalism and what we can learn from them. We want to understand present. We want to understand how capitalism works today differently than it did in the past, and how we need to organize. And of course, we need to build a vision of the future that is going to, be our compass, be our set of organizing principles. That when we are trying to create socialism, we use that to make sure that we're on the right path, right? And as challenges come up and we decide how we're going to handle those challenges, we can use these principles to help guide how we respond to that, so that we're always improving that socialist society, like we talked about before. So that includes things like non-hierarchy. We want to make sure that we're not recreating the hierarchies of capitalism, where some people or groups are more important than others. We want to have a direct democracy where everyone can participate in decision making. We want to make sure that it's society based in social justice, which means we're fighting all forms of dehumanization. I like that as a broad term. That could include racism, sexism, transphobia, xenophobia, whatever form you find. We're fighting against all those forms of dehumanization. We want to recognize everyone has human rights and deserves to be taken care of, to have their basic needs met, to be loved, to participate in decisions, all those things. Of course, our society has to be ecological and be sustainable. And then finally, it has to be built with a moral economy in mind that is not a capitalist economy. It's an economy that works for the needs of people. So those are kind of the basic principles of green socialism, social ecology, and you see kind of a form of these in the key values of the Green Party. You can kind of interpret the key values as related to this stuff here. But this is how Murray Bookchin originally kind of developed it. So any thoughts on that, Chris?
A big one is, I think the left has a problem in recreating capitalist structures when it creates itself, and recreating capitalist organizational structures, right? The left especially in the United States, tends to lead with rhetoric when we should be reading into or we should be leading with how we organize ourselves and how we organize our work and things like that. To me, it always comes back to the saying, words ain't shit, right? You can talk about how socialist you are, but you can still have an extremely authoritarian structure that gets in the way of your organizing. Mm-hmm. I think Bookchin lays out a really good kind of framework that we can kind of judge ourselves by. I just saw Vicky said capitalism on steroids turns into fascism. That's exactly what Rudolf Rocker says.
Right.
Except he says it's inevitable. That he says capitalism is fascism. It will always get. Right. We'd mentioned Rocker earlier. So since I love it when plain words expressions of socialist theory come out. It makes me think of when I was a community organizer and I was knocking doors and I talked to this young black guy, probably 25, and I was supposed to talk to him for 5 minutes. I talked to him for over an hour. He became one of my best organizers in his neighborhood. But on the top of his little card that I carried around for everyone I talked about, I wrote Foucault and doesn't know it. Because the way this young man talked about power mirrored the way that Foucault talks about power in Knowledge Power, right? But this young man's never read Foucault. He has no idea who this gay French postmodernist is, right? Who's dead at this point. But his experiences were able to allow him to articulate the exact same ideas as someone who spent their entire life theoretically thinking about this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here, but I think that's another super important thing that we'll talk about a lot next. We'll talk about it next month as well. But the left overvalues book learning. And that's not to that I'm not trying to devalue book learning, right? It's reading these theories, getting exposed to these ideas is important. Understanding the past, present, and future, like this slide says, is important. But we way undervalue experience. And the reality is we don't need to explain the negatives of capitalism to people, right? The working class knows about capitalism. The working class has become alienated, though. The working class is, in many ways, rightfully decided that they're not going to participate in their own destruction anymore.
Yeah. That relates to the the classic socialist concept of praxis, the theory and practice together. People intuitively, because they live it, understand the problems of capitalism, and they understand kind of where we need to go. But it's that experience that we don't necessarily understand what's the best strategy or tactics to take in order to get there. And so where the theory comes in is learning from history and past experience to better inform ourselves, so that when we take action today, we're more likely to get the wins and gains that we want.
It's not an either or. They're interconnected. And then when you come into organizing with just theory, that experience is essential to tell you how the theoretical things that exist are manifesting in local circumstances, right? What environmental racism looks different depending on where you live, right? What these things, how these things manifest in our local communities is different. And if you come in with a completely, academic theory-based thing, you're going to be missing, because you're not going to have your finger on the pulse of what's actually happening in communities. So you need both. It's not a lot of things are posed as either ors, as mutually exclusive. And we talked about it last month in the Green Party. Are we an electoral party or are we a movement party? We're both, and we have to be both. And it's the same goes for the left in the United States in particular has been stuck in its books, and it's kind of forgotten how to go out into the neighborhoods. And that's left us with a very academic, theory-oriented left that is really obsessed with the books of old dead white men, and they just aren't listening and engaging with the people who are, expressing the experiences of oppression that they face under capitalism. It's a major organizational shift we have to make in the left that I'm sure we'll get into next month.